Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the most significant decision in Canadian history isn't happening at a ballot box, but in a closed-door negotiation room where a government minister just sacrificed a sure thing with a superpower to secure the livelihoods of 10,000 families? And what if the price of true national sovereignty requires walking away from the most advanced weapon system on Earth to embrace a partner that offers independence rather than subservience? We are standing at a precipice. For decades, the trajectory of Canadian defense and industrial policy was a straight line pointing directly south. The assumption was baked into the very bedrock of Ottawa's strategic thinking. When it comes to the defense of North America, you buy American, you integrate with American systems, and you accept your role as a junior partner in the continental security architecture. It was safe, it was predictable, it was the age of quiet obedience. But that age is over. We are witnessing a tectonic shift in the geopolitical landscape of the Northern Hemisphere. The story unfolding today is not merely a technical debate about thrust-to-weight ratios or radar cross-sections. It is a story about a nation waking up to the reality that in a world of volatile alliances and America-first protectionism, dependency is no longer a safety net, it is a noose. At the heart of this transformation is the battle between the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II and the Saab Gripen E, a contest that has become the proxy war for the soul of Canada's future economy and its place in the world. To understand the gravity of this shift, we must look at the moment the government decided to challenge the narrative and drop the hammer on the status quo. The catalyst for this upheaval came from a source that few in the defense industry expected to be so blunt. Standing before reporters, Industry Minister Mélanie Joly delivered a statement that reverberated through the halls of the Pentagon and the boardrooms of Lockheed Martin. In a file usually handled with diplomatic ambiguity and cautious bureaucraties, Joly dropped the hammer. She stated unequivocally that Canada was not receiving enough industrial benefit from the F-35 program. "I think Canadians expect more, and we should get more," she declared. To the uninitiated, this might sound like standard political posturing, but within the context of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, it was heresy. The F-35 consortium is built on a specific model. Member nations buy the jet, and in return, their domestic industries get to bid on contracts to manufacture parts for the global fleet. There are no guarantees, only opportunities to compete. For years, Canada played this game, contributing billions to the development costs, with the expectation that Canadian aerospace firms would reap the rewards. However, the reality has fallen woefully short of the promise. Joly's intervention highlighted a festering wound in the Canadian aerospace sector. Billions of dollars were leaving the country to purchase these fifth-generation fighters, yet the return on investment was shrinking. The Auditor General DOS reports have begun to paint a grim picture of ballooning costs. Lifetime estimates for the F-35 fleet are pushing toward $70 billion, while the projected industrial benefits, once touted as a windfall, are estimated at only $15.5 billion over 50 years. Joly was effectively saying that the emperor has no clothes. The industrial participation offered by the U.S. deal was beginning to look less like a partnership and more like a tribute payment. Canada was sending capital south and receiving symbolic participation in return. This dissatisfaction is not happening in a vacuum. It is fueled by a broader political environment where the United States, particularly under the unpredictable pressure of Donald Trump's tariff policies, has shown a willingness to weaponize trade against its closest allies. When steel and aluminum tariffs hit, and when threats to auto manufacturing loom, the idea of handing over the largest defense procurement contract in Canadian history to a partner that actively undermines Canadian industry becomes politically toxic. While Ottawa was voicing its frustration, a new player arrived with a solution that was diametrically opposed to the American model. Into this breach stepped Saab, the Swedish defense giant, with a proposal that was diametrically opposed to the American model. If the F-35 represented a take-it-or-leave-it approach to global supply chains, the Saab Gripen E represented a custom-built industrial renaissance. The offer on the table is staggering in its directness. 10,000 jobs. This is not a vague promise of potential economic activity. Saab's executives, accompanied by the Swedish king and queen in a display of high-level diplomatic seriousness, laid out a blueprint for a make-in-Canada ecosystem. The proposal is to build the Gripen E in Canada, for Canada, by Canadians. This distinction cannot be overstated. Under the F-35 model, Canadian workers might manufacture a landing gear door or a software patch, but the intellectual property, the final assembly, and the high-level engineering remained firmly under U.S. control. Saab proposed transferring the technology and the production line to Canadian soil. They are talking about partnering with Canadian titans like Bombardier, CAE, and IMP Aerospace to create a full production hub. The vision is that Canada wouldn't just be a customer, it would be a creator. Canadian engineers would learn to build the jet from nose to tail. They would hold the keys to the software source code. They would manage the integration of weapon systems. And crucially, this Canadian production line could become an export hub, supplying Gripens to other nations, such as Ukraine, that are looking for alternatives to the heavy logistical footprint of American jets. 10,000 jobs in aerospace engineering, advanced manufacturing, and research and development is a generational injection of capability. It represents industrial sovereignty. It is the difference between renting a house and building one with your own hands. For a government desperate to secure high-paying jobs and insulate the economy from the shocks of U.S. protectionism, the Gripen deal transformed from a Tier 2 option into an economic lifeline. But this decision is not just about dollars and cents. It forces us to confront the harsh realities of our geography and what it truly means to defend the North. Beyond the economics, a fierce debate rages regarding the actual defense needs of the Great White North. The Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF, has long argued that interoperability with the United States is paramount. The F-35 is the quarterback in the sky, a stealth platform designed to penetrate advanced air defense networks, gather massive amounts of data, and share it with allied forces. In a conflict with a near-peer adversary like China or Russia in a contested airspace, the F-35 is undeniably the superior machine. However, critics and increasingly government strategists are asking a different question. Is Canada preparing to bomb foreign capitals, or is it preparing to defend its own sovereignty? The geographic reality of Canada is brutal. It is vast, frozen, and empty. Canadian pilots do not operate out of the well-manicured airbases of Nevada or the mild climates of the Mediterranean. They operate where minus 40 degrees is a warm day, where runways are covered in ice, and where infrastructure is non-existent. The Gripen was born for this environment. Sweden, a non-aligned nation living in the shadow of the Russian bear, designed the Gripen specifically for dispersed operations. It is engineered to take off and land on snowy highways. It can be refueled and rearmed by a small team of conscripts working out of a truck on a roadside in the middle of a blizzard. It is rugged, reliable, and fundamentally defensive. By contrast, the F-35 is a hangar queen. It requires pristine runways, climate-controlled maintenance facilities, and a massive logistical tail. Its cold weather performance has been questioned, and its maintenance requirements are heavy. In the context of Arctic sovereignty, patrolling the Northwest Passage and intercepting Russian bombers near the North Pole, the Gripen offers a practical utility that the F-35 struggles to match. Furthermore, the cost differential is immense. The F-35 is notoriously expensive to fly, with cost-per-flight-hour figures that drain defense budgets. The Gripen is designed to be the most cost-effective modern fighter in the world. For a nation like Canada, choosing the Gripen means freeing up billions of dollars over the life cycle of the fleet, money that can be reinvested into naval modernization, cyber defense, or social programs. However, there is an even deeper concern than geography or cost, one that touches the very nerve of our national independence. Perhaps the most chilling argument against the F-35, and the one that resonates most deeply with the concept of sovereignty, is the issue of control. The F-35 is often described as a flying computer. Its capabilities are defined not just by its airframe, but by millions of lines of code that is proprietary to Lockheed Martin and the U.S. government. This has given rise to the fear of the kill switch, or at the very least, a dependency leash. Because the mission data files, the software updates, and the supply chain are entirely controlled by Washington, Canada would effectively be renting its own air force. If the political winds in Washington were to shift, if a future administration decided to restrict Canada's use of the jets due to a diplomatic spat or withhold critical updates, Ottawa would be powerless. This is not a hypothetical paranoia. The current diplomatic climate, characterized by U.S. ambassadors like Pete Hoekstra issuing veiled threats about trade deals being contingent on defense purchases, has highlighted the danger of this dependency. Hoekstra's comments, perceived by many as blackmail, reinforce the feeling that the U.S. views Canada not as a partner, but as a vassal state that must pay tribute to the U.S. military-industrial complex to ensure economic stability. Saab's offer of full technology transfer eliminates this risk. With the Gripen, Canada owns the keys to the jet. Canadian technicians can modify the software. They can integrate new weapons without asking Stockholm for permission. They can repair the aircraft domestically without waiting for a part to be shipped from a depot in Texas. In an era where data sovereignty and supply chain security are becoming national security priorities, the ability to fully control one in-guess primary weapon system is a strategic asset that cannot be measured in dollars alone. You must realize that this fighter jet debate is but one theater in a much larger war for Canada, strategic repositioning. The fighter jet debate is but one theater in a much larger war for Canada, strategic repositioning. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet, Ottawa is executing a subtle but profound pivot away from exclusive reliance on the United States. This strategy, often referred to as Canada Global, seeks to diversify partnerships and build a trade firewall against American volatility. We see this in the historic embrace of South Korea. The summit in Gyeongju between Prime Minister Carney and President Yoon Suk-yeol was not a mere photo opportunity. It was the formalization of a new Pacific strategy. South Korea, the new arsenal of democracy, offers Canada a partner that shares its values and its need for independence from the superpowers. The discussions regarding Hanwha ocean submarines and defense cooperation signal that Canada is looking to Asia not just for trade, but for the hard hardware of national security. Similarly, the rush to solidify ties with Mexico and the European Union represents an economic self-defense strategy. By strengthening the CDA trade deal with Europe and coordinating agricultural and energy policies with Mexico, Canada is weaving a safety net. The logic is clear. If the U.S. closes its doors or imposes punitive tariffs, Canada must have other windows open. The Tier 2 status that the U.S. has implicitly assigned to Canada, expected to follow, expected to buy, expected to obey, is being rejected in favor of a network of middle power alliances. Canada, Sweden, South Korea, and others are finding that by pooling their industrial and strategic strengths, they can create a counterbalance to the hegemony of the giants. Ironically, while Washington attempts to exert pressure through trade and defense channels, the balance of power in the resource sector has quietly shifted in our favor. Ironically, while the U.S. attempts to strong-arm Canada on fighter jets and dairy tariffs, the balance of power in the raw materials sector has quietly shifted north. The transition to a green economy and a digitized military has made critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, germanium, zinc, the oil of the 21st century. And Canada is sitting on a treasure trove. The United States has belatedly realized its vulnerability. Washington has begun buying stakes in Canadian mining companies, a desperate move to secure the supply chains necessary for everything from electric vehicle batteries to the guidance systems of missiles. But in doing so, they have handed Ottawa a powerful lever. The U.S. may own shares in these mines, but Canada owns the geography. Canada owns the permits, the environmental regulations, and crucially, the refining capacity. When China restricted exports of germanium, Canadian refineries became the bottleneck through which American industry had to pass. This turns the table on the traditional narrative of Canadian vulnerability. Every tariff Trump threatens can now be met with a quiet reminder that the U.S. defense industrial base runs on Canadian minerals. The resource sector, once seen as a hewer of wood and drawer of water, has become a strategic shield. Canada is no longer just a supplier, it is a gatekeeper. If you're finding this breakdown of Canada's strategic shift valuable, please do me a favor and hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue to bring you these deep dives into the geopolitical moves that shape our world. As we weigh these strategic levers, we must also consider the profound ripple effects this decision will have on the human fabric of our nation and the stability of the Western alliance itself. Consider the message this sends to the rest of the NATO alliance. For 2 decades, the prevailing doctrine has been standardization, the idea that every allied nation should fly the same American jet to streamline logistics. But this monoculture carries a hidden risk. If the F-35 fleet were to be grounded by a critical software bug or a specific adversary countermeasure, the entire alliance would be blinded. By choosing the Gripen, Canada would be championing a doctrine of resilience through diversity. We would be signaling to partners like Spain and Switzerland, who are also quietly reassessing their commitments, that a healthy alliance requires heterogeneity, not conformity. Canada's pivot isn't about abandoning NATO. It is about strengthening it by ensuring that not all of the West's eggs are in one Lockheed Martin basket. But perhaps the most profound impact is human. For generations, Canada has suffered from a silent crisis known as the brain drain. The brightest graduates from Waterloo, McGill, and the University of Toronto, engineers, physicists, software developers, have systematically migrated south. They leave because the ceiling in Canada is too low. They leave to work for NASA, for SpaceX, for the giants of the American military-industrial complex, because that is where the cutting-edge work is done. The F-35 deal perpetuates this cycle. It keeps Canada as a branch plant, a place where workers assemble parts designed by geniuses in California. The Saab deal reverses this flow. By transferring the full intellectual property and establishing a global production hub in Montreal and Halifax, we create a gravity well for talent. Suddenly, a young aerospace engineer does not have to move to Palmdale or Fort Worth to work on next-generation fighter technology. They can do it in Quebec. They can build a career, buy a home, and raise a family in Canada while working at the absolute bleeding edge of their field. This is how you build a nation, not just by buying assets, but by retaining the minds that create them. The 10,000 jobs promised are not just assembly line positions. They are the foundation of a new Canadian middle class, rooted in high-tech sovereignty. Furthermore, this industrial independence opens a new moral dimension to our foreign policy. Under the F-35 restrictions, Canada can only export or donate equipment with explicit American permission. We saw the limitations of this during the early days of the Ukraine conflict, where third-party transfers were bogged down in Washington's bureaucratic and political mire. A Canadian-built Gripen fleet changes the calculus. It positions Canada not just as a consumer of security, but as a producer of it. Imagine a future where Canada can directly support fellow democracies like Ukraine with aircraft manufactured in Canadian plants, free from the veto of a polarized U.S. Congress. This is the difference between being a passive observer of history and an active participant. It transforms Canada from a middle power that mediates into a central power that provides the material support necessary for freedom to survive. So we return to the central question, the choice that will define Canada for the next half-century. On one path lies the F-35. It is the path of least resistance. It maintains the status quo of deep integration with the U.S. military. It provides the RCAF with the most capable stealth fighter in history, ensuring they can fly alongside American pilots on day one of a major war. But it comes at the cost of immense financial strain, industrial hollowing out, and a permanent state of technological dependency on a neighbor whose reliability is increasingly in question. On the other path lies the Gripen. It is the path of sovereignty. It secures 10,000 jobs and revitalizes a domestic aerospace industry that was once the envy of the world. It provides a jet perfectly suited to the defense of the Canadian Arctic and sustainable within the Canadian budget. It signals to the world that Canada is capable of charting its own course, building its own tools, and standing on its own 2 feet. This is a decision with massive implications, and I want to hear from you. Do you think Canada should stick with the proven power of the American F-35, or is the promise of 10,000 jobs and industrial independence with the Gripen worth the risk? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The friction we are seeing, the angry ambassadors, the threats of trade wars, the frantic lobbying by Lockheed Martin, is the sound of the old order breaking. Minister Joly's declaration that Canadians expect more was not just a negotiating tactic, it was a statement of national maturation. If Canada walks away from the F-35, it will be a seismic geopolitical event. It will be interpreted in Washington as a breach of faith, a betrayal of the continental fortress. There will be consequences. Tariffs may rise, diplomatic shoulders may turn cold, but the alternative is to accept a future where Canada is permanently a client state, paying rent for its own security, its industries relegated to the sidelines, its foreign policy dictated by the whims of the White House. The Gripen deal represents a gamble, yes, but it is a gamble on Canada itself. It is a bet that Canadian engineers can build world-class tech. It is a bet that the Canadian North is worth defending on Canadian terms. And it is a bet that, in a multipolar world, the strongest alliances are not those of master and servant, but of independent partners who choose to stand together. Friends, the jet is just metal and code. The decision is about identity. Are we a country that buys what we are told, or are we a country that builds what we need? For the first time in decades, the answer to that question is not a foregone conclusion, and that is why the world is watching Ottawa. Thank you.